Well, good evening, everyone. My name is Jana Hafling. Thanks for joining us this evening. Kat Dillard and I started Rethinking Plastic with a goal to share and educate all that we were learning and continue to learn regarding single-use plastic. While we've always pushed for personal responsibility in dealing with our single-use plastic footprint, if you'll see the bad 5 in our logo later when we share our logo, we know much more is needed. Through Rethinking Plastic, we've met locally with schools, groups, churches, school board, city and county commissioners, city sustainability offices. We communicate with environmental groups, city and county commissions across our state and country. We've taken folks and students and toured recycling facility and toured landfills. And what we have learned is that recycling is not enough. The responsibility of the end of use of products and packaging should not be entirely on us. With many states, including Florida, we are preempted from regulating plastic locally. The opportunity to make plastic policy change that would impact our local environment is not permitted. While we've been rightly focused on the crisis in the forefront, the COVID pandemic, other imminent crises continue. The other imminent crisis continues. The crisis of our environment calls for bold measures.
And I'm Kat, and again, like Jana said, thank you all for your time. We're very happy to introduce Sydney Harris and Brendan Adamczyk. They're both from Product Stewardship Institute up in the cold Northeast. And we're really happy to have them here to give us a presentation on extended producer responsibility, as well as the soon to be in session, the Break Free from Plastic Pollution Act. So without further ado, Sydney and Brendan, take it away.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having us. Hello, everyone. Again, my name is Sydney Harris. I'm a senior associate at the Product Stewardship Institute, and I'm going to be co-presenting today with my colleague, Brendan Adamczyk. And so I'm going to kick us off, and hopefully you can see my screen now. Can someone just like nod or thumbs up or something that you can see it?
Yep, got it.
Perfect, thank you. Yeah, and then I will turn it over to Brendan about halfway through, so you'll get to hear from him as well. But yeah, thanks for having us. I am so happy to be here. So I'm just going to jump right in. We're here tonight to talk with you about extended producer responsibility. I will explain what that is. We're going to talk about specifically extended producer responsibility, or EPR, for packaging and paper products. Sometimes we abbreviate that as PPP. So just giving you a heads up now, if in some of our slides it says things like EPR for PPP, this is what we're talking about, but always feel free to, chime in the chat or let me know if I'm using too many acronyms. It's a bad habit. So I'll start by just giving you a brief overview of, who we are as an organization. So the Product Stewardship Institute is a national nonprofit that is working to reduce the health and environmental impacts of consumer products. And we do that by focusing on the entire life cycle of the product. So we're looking at design and production through to the end of life. And of course, it's not just product, it's also their packaging that we're focused on. So we take a pretty unique approach to solving environmental problems. We are primarily facilitators and mediators, and we facilitate dialogues among, all the key stakeholders to really forge lasting agreements that are rooted in producer responsibility and sustainable materials management. So the way we function is we represent government members.
The Cambridge exams start on April 26th and they go through to June 10th. All students in a course that says ACE on their schedule would take the Cambridge exams.
But I don't know if someone maybe is not on mute. But anyway, sorry about that. So we represent government members from over 47 states and hundreds of local governments, as well as over 100 partners. So those are from companies, organizations, universities, international governments, anyone really can be a member, a partner of PSI, and governments can be our members. And we also have, many individual donors who just like the work we're doing and contribute that way. So really a mixture of constituents that we're serving. And what we've done is really over the past 20 years, which is how old we are. We're almost 21, turning 21 soon. PSI and our members and partners, we've really built the capacity for product stewardship and extended producer responsibility in the US by looking at both voluntary and legislative initiatives. But I'm going to focus tonight on those legislative initiatives, those policies. So we've helped to pass 119 EPR laws in the US over the past 20 years. They span 33 states and Washington, DC, and they cover 14 different consumer products. So we're on a mission for sure. But one thing that is important to point out is so far in the US, we do not have packaging EPR laws yet. And we're going to talk more about that tonight, but that's one thing that we're working on right now. But let me back up for a second and just, what is EPR, right? Like, what is extended producer responsibility? So I want to take a second and sort of describe what that means. EPR laws are laws that extend a producer's, so a brand owner's, financial and management responsibility for their products and their packaging beyond, making the product and putting it on the market, all the way to post-consumer reuse, recycling, or safe disposal, and upstream as well to redesigning that product. So it extends the responsibility and the participation of brands both directions, and really gets them involved in that whole life cycle of the product. Essentially, the principle is like, hey, if you're going to put something on the market, then you need to be responsible for making sure it is designed properly and managed properly at the end of life. You don't just get to flood the market with whatever you want and profit off of that while everybody else has to foot the bill for dealing with the consequences. That's the lay way to explain EPR, and that's what we work on. So, hang on. There we go. So some of the products that I mentioned, there's laws on over 14 products. Some of the top product areas that we've worked on in the past, some of the earliest EPR programs in the country have been on paint, electronics, mattresses, pharmaceuticals was really popular a few years ago, and there's still active work on pharmaceuticals EPR. And then some of the sort of newer wave of EPR policies are really focused on packaging, and stay tuned for textiles because that's coming soon as well. And so we're really here to talk about packaging tonight. And so you actually do have one EPR law, though, I'll mention, in Florida. It's on rechargeable batteries, and it was passed in 1993. I don't believe it's been updated in any significant way since then. But you got one, so you're on the map. There are a number of laws all over the US, as we mentioned. So these are just some more examples at the bottom here. There's batteries, mercury thermostats, mercury bulbs, and some other products I've already mentioned. And there are, these are spread all over the country. So we do have a lot of precedent for these laws in the US, but again, none on packaging right now. And that's where a ton of attention and focus is right now, and what we're going to talk about tonight. So let's dive into packaging. You probably already know this. You probably already know why packaging is a problem. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time telling you again what you already know, but I think it's important to sort of remember the 4 biggest issues with packaging, which is, first of all, the market is flooded with packaging, right? We know this from living our lives and trying to buy things that we need. There's too much packaging. There's just too much. We cannot keep up with the amount of packaging, and things are over packaged. I mean, it's just a flood. And the materials that packaging is made of are increasingly complicated. They are no longer like your nice little glass milk bottle. They are now a 10-layer candy wrapper with like nano layers of incredibly complicated chemicals and materials. We can't deal with those. We don't have the infrastructure to deal with those. The packaging materials are evolving way faster than our old clunky recycling and waste management infrastructure. Also, there's a ton of confusion about what to do with stuff, partly because that stuff is increasingly complicated, and not everybody has the same system in every place. If I go to one town over, the recycling rules are different. So we end up with a ton of contamination and confusion about our system that really bogs down the entire recycling system and reduces the value of recycled materials because there's tons of contamination in there. And the last, but also equally important thing is that, as I think you probably have heard, there have been some really intense market fluctuations and disruptions over the past, decade, but especially the past 3 or 4 years. There was the China ban, which you may have heard that term, or the China sword policy. Essentially, they don't want our stuff anymore, and that is perfectly reasonable because we were literally shipping them tons of very contaminated, worthless plastic for the most part, and why would anybody want that? And so, not having export markets where we can ship our stuff abroad because we can't deal with it has unsurprisingly disrupted the domestic recycling program. Now we don't have anywhere to send this stuff. It's suddenly not profitable to collect it. Lots of programs in the US have shut down. So this combined is the packaging problem, right? This is the situation that we're facing. And I thought I could help us envision what that system could look like under EPR for packaging by kind of walking through our current system, how it works / doesn't work, and then how EPR would change that system. So bear with me on this little journey that we're going to take. Here's you in the corner. And let's say for Valentine's Day last weekend, you bought some chocolates for your loved one. I bought some for my mom. And let's say those chocolates came with a bunch of packaging materials, right? Because we know right now everything's overpackaged. They came in a box. This little guy in the middle is some crinkly plastic wrap that was in there. And then let's say they were packaged in some packaging peanuts, some styrofoam peanuts, to really make sure that they stayed in place and didn't break. So what do you do with all of that stuff? Well, the box is probably recyclable. It's cardboard. You probably send it in your recycling bin if you have that access, which not everybody does. You probably send it, to be picked up by some truck and get recycled. And then the other stuff probably goes in the trash. Styrofoam peanuts and little crinkly plastic wrappers, those are not recyclable. So they're going to end up in your trash. Okay, so then what happens? Well, maybe that box gets recycled, but as we just discussed, our recycling system is really struggling. Over 90 programs in the US have shut down. Communities are stockpiling materials and sending them to landfill. We're not really sure that that's getting recycled. For plastic, only about 9% of plastic has ever been recycled. So we're not doing a very good job. So we hope that truck is taking that thing to a recycling place, but is it, and is that effectively being recycled? We don't know. What about the stuff in the trash? Well, that stuff's going to go to either a landfill or an incinerator, depending on where you live, or maybe right into the environment, and none of those are good outcomes, right? And all of this, our current highly dysfunctional system, all of this works because you, the taxpayer, pay your local government money to operate or hire that truck to take that stuff away and do all this stuff with it. So you're paying for those chocolates, which includes the cost of all those materials that they're packaged in. And then you turn around and you also have to pay your local government to deal with all that waste that they didn't make and they didn't have any input into designing. That is our current system, and that is bananas. So EPR, again, would shift the responsibility both upstream and downstream for those packaging materials to the producers, to the people who put it on the market in the first place and decide what packaging materials to use and make money off of those. It includes financial responsibility, and sometimes it includes day-to-day management. So I want to look at the same system, but how it would work under EPR for packaging. So you're here now, again, but you're green this time because we're living in an EPR world. You buy the same chocolates, and let's say they come in the same materials for now, just to make it easy. They come in that box and those crinkly plastic wrappers and those foam peanuts. Okay, so you take that box and you're like, cool, this is recyclable, and you put it in your bin and the recycling truck picks it up. Only this time, producers are the ones paying for the recycling system. So there is sustainable financing for recycling, and that means we know that stuff is getting recycled because there's money to make it happen. We no longer have to deal with the consequences of those market disruptions and the fact that local government budgets are completely strained by other things because that money isn't really coming from them. So we also bake transparency into EPR bills. And so you will literally know what happens to that stuff because it will need to be public information, which is not always the case right now. So this is just to, I forgot to click, sorry. But so here in this scenario, instead of your local, you paying your government and your government paying the truck, Chocolate Candy Inc., Valentine's Day Inc., or whatever, they're the ones footing the bill for that recycling. And that's how we know it happens. What about the crinkly plastic wrappers? Well, one of the things that EPR does, aside from provide sustainable financing for recycling right now, is it also provides on-ramps for more materials, some of those problematic materials, to become recyclable or be redesigned. And so this is my simplified way of showing this little guy doing some research on the crinkly wrappers. Maybe he's figuring out how to put recycled content in there, or how to redesign a wrapper that's made of something else, or how to build a machine that will recycle those wrappers and capture them. Either way, there's money coming again from the producers, from the brand owners, to fund that research and development and that infrastructure expansion that we need. So we're providing on-ramps to get stuff out of the trash and into the recovery and recycling system, into the circular economy. The styrofoam peanuts probably are still going in the trash at first. However, the other thing that EPR does is it includes financial incentives for producers to stop using materials that are undesirable and use more materials that have better outcomes. So in an ideal EPR scenario, these peanuts are phased out entirely because the system is charging producers, is charging Chocolate Candies Inc. so much money to choose styrofoam peanuts that it's just not viable anymore, and they don't do it. So to recap, what we get with EPR, we get a few extra bonus things as well. We get better, more consistent consumer education about recycling. So we reduce that confusion. Producers pay for that. We get infrastructure expansion and market development so we can recycle more things and do a better job doing it. And we get transparency so that we as the individual people and consumers know what's happening. That results in more recycling, less contamination, less stuff going to the trash and ending up in the environment, better product design and different materials used, so that design for environment piece and real upstream change. This is how our system could be transformed under EPR for packaging. So I'm going to zip through the next few slides really quickly, but we will send these around afterward if you want to look through them. But there are really 4 key pieces to EPR. It requires legislation. This is not a voluntary program, and that's really important because if we don't have legislation, then we don't have a level playing field, and that means you can get some producers paying in and some maybe don't want to play nice, and then you don't have that sustainable financing that we need. So everybody has to pitch in, everybody has to be obligated, and that requires a law. And also helps define things like what is packaging and who is responsible. There needs to be real clarity about how much producers pay into the system and how that money is spent. So those are, important things to figure out. And then we need to make sure that we know how all stakeholders get a say. So organizations like Rethinking Plastic, also get to contribute to what that program looks like. And, anybody gets to, pitch in their thoughts. And so we need to figure out the governance and like how everybody gets a say in the program. And then lastly, and perhaps most importantly for this group, we really need to be clear in those policies about how we're going to drive the environmental outcomes that we want to see. So is that banning certain things is in part of the bill? Is it requirements for recycled content? What are those incentives looking like so that we get that like phase out of styrofoam peanuts, that sort of thing. So really making sure that you get those environmental outcomes. And there is a lot of activity right now in the US on this. So this is a map of currently active states in the US that we are working with on packaging EPR legislation. So about a dozen states right now really working on this. There's tons of live bills. It's a whirlwind of activity. And we may soon see this year the first or first three, who knows, packaging EPR programs passed in the US. And we also have a federal bill, and I'm going to stop here because I want to turn it over to Brendan to talk about the federal bill. So I am going to see if Brendan is ready to unmute.
Yeah.
Oh, great. Okay, cool. So I'll stop there. Yeah.
Awesome. So thanks so much, Sydney. Like Sydney and others said, my name is Brendan. I'm an associate for policy and programs at PSI, and I'm based in Oregon. So I'm also right now equally jealous of the Florida sun and temperatures that it sounds like y'all are having. But yeah, Sydney gave us a great introduction of EPR, and I'm sure some of you will have questions about that. But I wanted to talk about what that looks like in the context of the Break Free from Plastic Pollution Act, which is a really exciting piece of federal legislation. So it's introduced by Representative Lowenthal from California, Representative Udall, or Senator Udall from New Mexico last year. It was a really exciting, expansive, major reform of the U.S. recycling system at the federal level. Like Sydney said, we've never seen any kind of EPR for packaging in the U.S. In terms of any laws. So the fact that we saw a bill introduced at the federal level was an indication of some real momentum happening, not just in states but nationally. Building towards some real change for EPR. If you want to go to the next slide, Sydney. Awesome. Thank you. So there's 4 main components of the Break Free from Plastic Pollution Act, which you'll also see is the BFFPPA, but I'm going to go with the full name because there's enough acronyms going on here. The first one is really big. There's 10 states currently right now that have beverage container refund programs. You might know them as bottle bills. You pay a 5 or 10 cent deposit when you get the bottle, and you can pick it up if you drop the bottle off. This bill would establish a national program like that, which would be a 10-cent deposit for all bottles. Those programs tend to increase bottle recycling anywhere from 3 to 4 times. They've been really efficient in places, as varied as Oregon, as Vermont, California, Hawaii. And so they're really, they really have been shown to increase recycling, and this would establish a national program. It would ban non-recyclable single-use plastic products. That's like styrofoam, or that's a product, the brand name. The product's called polystyrene. I'm sure y'all have interacted with that. And it would ban those from being sold. Ban single-use foodware as well. Transition out plastic straws by request only. It would ban single-use plastic bags, which would be really major in that little introduction that was given. It's really important to recognize this importance of this kind of recycling system, but also banning plastic from going into the system. And it would place a fee on other carryout bags, like paper bags, of 10 cents, which also in the states that have that and the municipalities, that's been shown to decrease the usage of plastic and other types of carryout bags. And then lastly, and why we're bringing this bill up and why we're so excited about it, is that it would establish a national EPR for packaging program. Which again, unlike anything we've ever seen in the US, instead of doing this kind of state by state piecemeal approach, it would take the entire US and put it under a single program, which would be really exciting. Next slide, Sydney. Thank you. There's a couple of really exciting additional features to this bill that kind of take it above and beyond just this cool environmental bill into something that really would be amazing. One of the pieces that it sets minimum post-consumer recycled content requirements to be used in beverage containers and in plastic products. And those are requirements that scale up with each year, and I'll talk about that in a later slide. But so what that does, like Sydney had talked about, is having a goal like that as part of the statute forces producers to really consider what they're designing, how they're designing their products, and what they're putting into their products. And what it does is that it builds in at first financial incentives and then ultimately penalties to basically encourage producers to move towards these post-consumer content in their products. It also prohibits the shipping of plastic waste overseas to certain developing countries. So there's been a lot of questions and changes going on, especially in Africa. Kenya recently passed a ban on almost all plastic products in their country, and also on accepting imported plastic. And so there's been a lot of international pressure. They were a place where plastic was shipped. And so there's a lot of questions about the justice aspects of that, about whether it's fair to be, taking our plastic problem and putting it on other countries. And this bill would bar that from happening. So the U.S. would have to, and kind of another layer to force the U.S. to seriously consider looking inward and figuring out ways to reduce our waste without just making it someone else's problem. And one of the things I'm most excited about is would pause the construction of any new plastic production facilities until the EPA can update and create new regulations for air pollution and water pollution and all of the other, nasty negative impacts of these facilities. I think that's really exciting to me because that's one of the biggest, environmental justice impacts that you see from plastic production is where these facilities are being placed or, sited. And the fact that this bill would pause that for, I believe it's 2 years, to allow the EPA to finally catch up would do a lot of good towards reducing those negative impacts. Thank you, Sydney. So this bill has a lot of the components Sydney talked about. It, producers have to pay fees to an organization. They have to establish the recycling system that Sydney was talking about. They would reimburse municipalities for their funds, all of the things that we want to see in extended producer responsibility legislation. And an exciting component, and I will point out that these are numbers from the bill that's introduced last year. Some of the numbers and also the timeline might change slightly with the bill being reintroduced, but still it's an indication that 5 years after the bill went into effect, 65% of these covered products, cardboard packaging, plastic packaging, all this packaging would have to be reused or recycled, and 75% of beverage containers and paper products have to be recycled. And then that goes up to 80% and 90% respectively after 10 years. So what this shows is that you establish a system, an EPR system that's encouraging producers and then eventually requiring producers to meet these goals. And then you're also taking that financial burden off of taxpayers and off of municipalities and forcing the producers to not only, internalize these costs and deal with this on the design end, but also on the end of life management. And as Sydney talked about, a really exciting process of EPR programs is that they have a really significant government oversight. So this law would be overseen by the US EPA. There would also be the establishment of a large, diverse, multi-stakeholder advisory committee. Environmental organizations like Rethinking Plastic would have a major role on that committee. Other groups in that committee might be producers themselves. It might be recycling facilities, environmental justice organizations. And the idea is you have a combination of that committee and the EPA, and that really allows these bills to be transparent and to really create some change. And so we're particularly excited. The expectation is that this bill is going to be reintroduced next month by Representative Lowenthal again, and I'm very proud of my own Senator Jeff Merkley from Oregon. There will be a couple of changes to the bill, but all in all, it's keeping these main components. It's going to be a strong EPR bill. It's going to have a strong, performance goals and incentives, and it's really an exciting opportunity with a new administration and a lot of growing momentum, as Sydney was talking about, for EPR for packaging on the state level. With a dozen states considering it in this legislative season. This is a lot more than just kind of a wish list bill. This is genuinely, we believe, indicative of some major shifting in the US landscape. And so we're really excited to see where this bill goes. And we think it has a real chance of indicating the willingness for EPR for packaging in the US. So yeah, that was a lot, I'm sure, on EPR and the Break Free from Plastic Pollution Act. I saw we had a couple questions. I can really briefly say PSI has a lot of different resources on our website. We have fact sheets. We have reports for restaurants. We were working on, I know Sydney was working on a plastic reduction tool for restaurants before COVID. We had to change slightly with that. Maybe Sydney, if you want to talk more about that. But in general, we have a lot of resources and a lot of work going on. And I think it's, there's a really great opportunity to take some action to support EPR nationally and maybe in Florida.
Thank you, Brendan.
And yeah, just feel free if you have any, happy to answer questions now. And if you have any questions after this, Sydney and I are more than happy to provide any resources or answer any other questions.
Yeah, absolutely. And our contact info is up here. So, if you think of something later, you can also reach out. But yeah, I think we're happy to answer questions. We have a little under 20 minutes for questions.
There's a couple questions down there.
Yeah, so let's see here. I'm just looking at the chat. Looks like we have a question about ideas on how much will be added to product costs at the end of use cost. Yeah, that's a really great question. So we get this question a lot. The question is, if producers are going to start paying for, internalizing the cost of redesigning products and properly recycling and disposing of them, isn't that going to make our stuff cost more, right? Aren't they just going to pass those costs on to consumers? And one thing I realized as I was talking that I didn't share with you all here on the screen, I think we just neglected to put this slide in, but EPR for packaging has been in place around the world. So we don't have programs in the US, but around the world, these programs have been in place for over 30 years in Europe, Asia, Canada, for decades and decades. We have seen these programs in action. So it's actually not a very new idea at all. And we are very fortunate to be able to shape these policies based on what other programs and countries have already learned, right, over tons of experience. And what we've seen from those programs is that there really is not any evidence that consumer costs increase under these programs. And one really interesting study that I'll mention on this is, so Canada, you know how Canada has provinces, and Canada has EPR for packaging, but they don't have it at a national level. They have it province by province. So that would be like here if it passed, you know, state by state. And so there has been research done comparing at like national grocery store chains in Canada that are like in all the provinces, and they've compared like the same 100 brand name things. So like a jar of olives from some, I don't know, brand, and a carton of milk, and, you know, the same exact products at the same exact chain stores in the provinces that have, there's about 5 provinces that have EPR for packaging in Canada versus the ones that don't. And there is zero difference in the cost of those products. And I think the reason that happens is just the scale of this. So on an individual product basis, like you would be talking fractions of a cent, maybe, if anything got passed on, which again, we haven't seen, but it would just be so small because, you know, they're paying for things at the scale of like often global markets, right? They're already paying for these programs in Europe, many countries in Asia and Canada, and now spreading to South America and Africa as well. So they're already paying for these programs in their products, and they price them just based on so many factors that it's almost impossible to tease out, you know, what really causes the change in price. But the best research I've seen is that province by province study in Canada, and there was just zero change in price. So that was pretty convincing for me.
Can I just add something that I was thinking about as far as price goes? When you look at the recycling facilities and the amount they pay and the amount when they have, you know, systems gummed up because of single-use plastic bags, and then the price that we pay for our landfills and filling landfills faster than planned, and just all the prices we already pay that then wouldn't be anymore, or eventually would change. Those things wouldn't be happening like they happen now. So that cost probably should be factored in somehow.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the whole idea here is that we're currently all paying for the negative, you know, environmental and health and tax issues associated with our broken system. And so this is internalizing some of those externalities in, I think, the best possible, most efficient way. Let me see if there are other questions. Have you had any feedback from the plastic lobby? That is a great question. And the answer is yes, we sure have. They don't love EPR. Don't love it, have been lobbying against it for 15 years. There's a reason we don't have packaging EPR in the US. It's not like we just heard about it. We've been working on it for 15 years. But, you know, I think the difference right now, the reason there's so much momentum right now is that there has been this perfect storm of issues, right? With the market disruptions and local government budgets just shrunk, and, you know, with COVID especially, like they need to move on to other things like safety. That plus the just exponential flood of packaging and growing consumer awareness and pressure, all that has combined to create enough political will to pass EPR with or without the plastics lobby, frankly. So they're now actually at the table because they're realizing that these bills are going to pass anyway. And now they are ready to negotiate and try to figure out like, okay, how can we contribute? What can we do? So we are seeing a lot of activity now. And I think it's because of that political will and all that pressure. So let's see. Brendan, maybe you want to tackle this one, but there's a question about how likely is the Break Free from Plastic Pollution Act to pass?
Yeah, so I mean, I think anyone who follows following politics knows that the Senate especially is not a place where lots of legislation is passed in, I don't know, in my lifetime. So I would say as of now, I would not think it's a particularly likely thing to pass in this Senate, and when, you know, especially in the midst of COVID. But I do think something that's really exciting that's going to happen is there will be a lot of hearings on it, and there will be a lot of information that will be gathered that even if it doesn't necessarily help with the national bill, one thing we've seen on some of these state bills is that several of them are borrowing language or ideas or expertise from the national bill, from, you know, the knowledge or the data that's being gathered for it. So even if the bill itself isn't going to pass right away, and I think it's, you know, it's a big lift. I saw several folks are talking about, obviously Sydney's talked about some challenges, but about some of the challenges that you see in some of these, you know, on the state level that folks would push back on. But the farther the bill gets, the more, you know, energy and excitement it's going to generate, and the more we're going to see language from that or expertise from that being pulled into state bills. So I would say not very likely as of now, but the momentum is only growing.
And there's another question maybe similar that's about how we can help get that bill passed. So Brendan, I mean, you kind of already addressed that, but I mean, it does not hurt once it's reintroduced to call your state representatives and senators and say, hey, I'm following this bill and I care about it. They listen to that, you know, above pretty much everything else. So that is always helpful. And you know, one thing I will just mention, you know, I know you have a lot of preemption on local regulations on like things like bag bans and stuff in Florida, but you do not have a preemption on EPR. And I don't think that you will see one. Let's knock on wood. I've never heard of that before. So I think one thing Florida could do is also introduce a state level EPR bill for packaging that would really move the conversation along. And now is a great time to do it. There's models, like Brendan said, there's the federal bill, there's momentum up the wazoo. There's, you know, people are really paying attention and the industry is ready to talk. So I think those are just some thoughts I'll leave with you. Let's see what other questions we have. I know there was a request to just put our contact info on the screen again, so I'll do that in one moment.
Sydney, I shared it in the chat, so
oh, you did.
If folks can look in the chat, I put our website and both of our emails.
Fabulous, thank you. There's a question that says, what about incineration? Europe, China, Scandinavia are actively burning with air pollution control. Why not here? I don't know if I fully understand the question, but it seems like it's asking why don't we incinerate here? And we actually do incinerate here. I think that person knows that though, because it says 12 large-scale incinerators in Florida. So I'm wondering if the question is perhaps like why. Maybe it's about the Break Free from Plastic Pollution Act, Brendan, and like why that would put a pause on that, but also happy to have that person chime in and ask if I'm getting your question wrong. Just let me know.
I think that was Randy.
Yeah, it looks like 224.
Yeah, hi, this is Randy.
Hi, yeah.
Yeah, the main effort that you have, this challenge is tremendous because there's so much plastic. I know you're trying to prevent plastic producers from going online, but as we all know, there are these mega producers that are coming online to produce plastic and to utilize fossil fuel that's not being utilized for running cars and power plants and things like that. So it seems that unless we can take the plastic that's currently here, that has not the stuff that's on the shelves in the supermarket, but the stuff that's in these third world countries or whatnot, in some way generate power, electricity by burning this stuff. Now that's what these other countries and nations are doing. And I have talked to the people here in Florida that run a facility in West Palm Beach, and they say it costs more money, but yet they meet all the EPA standards as far as emissions, or they're below that. So I was wondering, it seems like that would be the other part of the puzzle to eliminate the plastic pollution we have right now. and then with your efforts to eliminate the plastic pollution that's coming in both ways at the same time. Because we have a tremendous amount of plastic pollution right now globally that we need to take care of, and it's not going to go away.
Got it. Yeah. So thanks for your question. I mean, it's definitely a complicated one. I will start by saying where do I start? So there's a number of issues with incineration of plastics. And I understand what you're talking about is really more specifically like in the context of where there's also EPR, like can there be kind of both things? Because one of the biggest problems with incineration is it doesn't really incentivize waste reduction, right? But if we have both things in place, then I can see, I think, where you're going with that. But there are a number of other issues with incineration that are, important to mention. I think one is 80% of incinerators in the US are located in low-income communities and communities of color, and they produce an incredible amount of air pollution. And the problem with those EPA standards is they haven't been updated in a very long time, sometimes decades, sometimes since the 70s when the Clean Air and Water Acts were passed. And we're not monitoring for many of the emissions that come from those facilities. So I think I read somewhere recently, but I would have to check on this, so don't quote me in like a newspaper. But I think I read somewhere that like in the last 10 years, the EPA has stopped monitoring more, like 4 times more air emissions than they've started monitoring or something like that. So the problem is we continue to take materials off the monitoring list, which makes it a lot easier to say that air pollution is improving, but really we're just not looking for the same things. And they're still there. They're still in those emissions, even with the scrubbers. And, there are definitely facilities that are complying. They're certainly complying with the law, and they're putting the scrubbers on, and they're trying, what they can. But the reality on the ground is they're still producing a ton of air pollution, and that air pollution is disproportionately happening in low-income communities and communities of color. That is completely unfair, and it's not acceptable to continue that pattern. So that would be one thing I just want to like put out there. I think another important factor is it's often not considered recycling. So when we do have EPR policies, they don't always ban incineration. That has been a critique of some of them. In fact, in other countries, they still sometimes allow that where those facilities exist. But it's all about how you define the hierarchy of dealing with materials. So we always want to reduce first. We always want to make things reusable and refillable and all that stuff. We always want to recycle before we throw things away. And we definitely want to put incineration toward the very bottom of that hierarchy. There is some waste to energy with like energy recovery, but a lot of that, again, is used for perpetuation of other things that we don't really want to do, like more cars and, more, other forms of fossil fuel based energy. And so there's a lot of, without going down too deep a rabbit hole, I just wanted to kind of touch on some of those main points. But I know we have other questions, and I want to keep going, but I could talk about this forever.
I could too. Okay.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
So, but Lynn, to respect folks' time, let me just scan for other questions as well. Let's see here. We have, what are the known impediments, specifics to the bill's passage that were encountered in 2020? I think that's about the Break Free from Plastic Pollution Act. But I'm going to liberally apply that question to the state bills as well. I think some of the known impediments to these bills passing are a lack of understanding of what EPR is and does, which we're working on, building that capacity, every day. Spreading the word. It's a lot of educating of legislators, because they're the ones putting forth and sponsoring the bills, but they don't really have time to dig into how this very complicated policy tool works. And that can be an issue. And then also, there are people who actively oppose the bills. And a lot of those folks are ones we've mentioned. the corporations who would be responsible for paying are largely not in support of these bills. Not super surprising, but it's worth saying, like, there's consumer brand, groups and associations that lobby against them. And that has certainly hindered the passage of the bills in the past. They also will do things like introduce confusing competing bills, and then the legislatures will kind of throw up their hands and be like, you know what, I can't figure out which one is best. We're going to deal with this next year, and kind of push things off. So we've seen all that. We've seen every play in the playbook. But again, I mean, I think where we're at right now is just there's so much momentum, and there have already been these bills, passed and defeated in previous years. So the momentum just continues to build, and we keep kind of chipping away at those points of opposition.
And I just want to jump in. I saw someone left a comment that talking about saying so the oil industry doesn't like plastics recycling, and I think importantly, a lot of the folks on the plastic side are fine with recycling. They just don't want to pay for it. So that's what a lot of these bills look like. Is they're happy to do things that help them help increase recycling, but it's when it gets to them footing the bill, which is what EPR is all about. That's where we see the struggle.
Yeah. Let's see here. So we have another question.
To ask a question online here.
I think so. Is that all right?
Yes, go ahead.
This is Gary. Do we know what the intellectual solutions to all of this is, and it's just incentives and a willingness to do what's right, or do we need some solutions? You say bottled beverages, and what is the alternative, I guess, to something like that? Is there a better way for us to buy and consume beverages than in plastic bottles? I'm trying to figure out whether we know what to do and we need to figure out how to incentivize it, or we're still figuring out solutions for some of the things that we do every day.
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think the answer to solving the plastics crisis is like a big capital E everything. We need all the things. We need every tool in the toolbox. We need smart policies. We need individual people taking action. We need consumers, consumer brands, companies to step up and take responsibility for what they're producing. But we also need all of us to, pitch in, and we need everything in between. Also, we need source reduction, and we need cleanups, and we need like upstream and downstream things, and education. And so it's all the things is the answer to the question. Unfortunately, like nothing is going to solve the problem alone. There's a really interesting report out from the UN Environment Program recently about that, and they're actually working on a global treaty, almost like a Paris Agreement, but for marine plastics. So that'll be really interesting over the next few years. But that'll also take a long time, and we don't really have that kind of time. So we need fast and slow solutions too. So I don't know if that's a very satisfying answer, but we do need like everything.
But we also know that the bottle deposits work.
Yeah, they do. Yep.
So that's a solution right there, is that, bottle deposits work. So we used to have them. We all did it. It was a while ago, but that's a solution right there. There are a lot of solutions out there. They just need to be implemented, and it's changing a habit. We're very convenience oriented, and so it's breaking our old habits.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good note to end on, because I get torn on this a lot, and my personal history is like working at many different organizations, and I have a marine science degree, so I've been focused on marine debris. And I started out really focused on people taking individual action, but what attracted me to EPR is that it's bigger. Like, this problem is so much bigger than me choosing reusable grocery bags. I still do that because I still think it's critically important, but I also know that the system is stacked against me, and I can't control what all these brands are doing, no matter how many reusable bags I use, So that's why I say we need both things, because I think it's critically important that we have a focus on people, stepping up and doing what they can. And I think people should feel empowered to do that. But I also don't think it's okay to make people feel guilty or like they've done something wrong, or you're green your green eco card is revoked because you bought Oreos and they came in packaging that no one can recycle. So like, I think we need to keep both things in our minds at once. Like individual action, super important, but we also need to change the entire system at the same time.
Absolutely.
So maybe we'll end there on that note.
Yes, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Sydney and Brendan. This has been awesome. It's great. I'm going to switch. Well, thank you for your time and such good points, and especially how you just wrapped it up there. It's personal, but it's bigger than that, and we all got to fight for it. So I'm going to share my screen just to finish up with a few last slides that Jana's going to go over. There we go.
So as we know, we just talked about how we have our individual responsibility. We personally can make a commitment to avoiding single-use plastic, the best we can. And if you look at Rethinking Plastics, social media and website, there's a lot of alternatives there to help you make some better choices. In Florida, we have current bills. It's very exciting. It's not the first time these bills have gone through. It happens every year. And just like we just talked about, the momentum is happening. So the current bills in the Florida state legislative session reversing preemption, here's the two bills, the House bill and the Senate bill numbers. So you can look those up and contact your representatives. And the easiest way to contact your representatives is to go to www.myreps.datamade.us. You can put in your zip code and they will give you all of your reps, federal, state, and local. So I am promoting all of us tonight, look up our reps and put them in our contact lists on our phone, in our computer, so that when something comes up and you need to contact your rep, you've got it. It's already there. And then it's easier to do. You're more apt to do it if you already have those contacts in there. So that's one of my wishes for tonight, is that we all do this. And then the next slide is another option we have to make some change federally is a movement called Plastic Free President. And there are 8 items in this Plastic Free President movement to have our president, through executive action, executive order, make some changes so that we can stop the huge plastic that is continuing to go into our environment every day. So if you'll check out Plastic Free President, you'll get some really good information, and then you can let our president know.
Oh, sorry. Those 8 items that you're talking about can all be done without any kind of bill passing, like President Biden can just do it on his own.
Yeah, through executive order. Yes. So, and here is our information. These are the 5 items that we really promote using alternatives for. And here's our website, social media, Facebook, Instagram. So if you will join our mailing list, we will send out the information that we just shared with you, and we'll keep you up to date on the Break Free from Plastic Pollution Act when it's introduced in March, and share those bills with you, the bill numbers, so that we can let our representatives know how we feel. So that's it. Are there any other questions?
I just wanted to say thank you so much for having us. This is a great group, and I'm excited to see. I'd love to see some action happening in Florida. So I'll definitely be keeping an eye out on that.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you both.
Thanks, everybody. Stay warm up north.
Yes, for sure. Thanks for joining, everyone. Really appreciate it. I hope you learned some things and can share with your friends and loved ones, because we need to start making a difference on this topic.
Yes.
So thank you.
Thank you.
Have a
Bye,
good night.
Jana. Bye, Kat.
Bye, guys.
Bye-bye.
Here.
Thanks, Gary. Thanks, Olivia and friends.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, you guys.
Awesome. Have a good night.